You're listening to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Two fans, two generations, all things Star Wars begins now.
All right. Well, hello, everybody. I'm Eric Vansel.
I'm Daryl Sanders.
And we're your hosts for this show. So we're happy that you guys could join us today. As usual, it's Friday night. And one thing that we love to do is talk Star Wars. So, I don't know, pretty much without further ado, we did leave a poll in the chat, by the way. Pretty much asking you guys, what your thoughts are, at least as far as is Mandalore going to play a big role in Season 3 of The Mandalorian, because that's what we're talking about today. Apparently, Jon Favreau, once again, it never ceases to amaze me how all these big Star Wars things just pop out of nowhere, you know?
Yeah, I mean, Jon Favreau being one of the creators of The Mandalorian, he and Dave Filoni, pretty much mastermind the Mandalorian series. And yeah, he's speaking a little bit about this upcoming season, which we'll see in 2023.
Yeah, so, I mean, I think that what we can do, first of all, is just recap some of the things that we do know. We're going to get to this because I want to actually show you guys. I mean, a lot of times we'll just read the article or whatever, but I want to show you guys exactly what Favreau said, read through it or whatever, because, I mean, it is fairly big. And I find it hilarious that, you just get all this news randomly, it seems. I mean, I'm still trying to process it, right? I mean, that's why I'm stumbling on my words. It's like I can't even process what I'm trying to say because it's so weird. It used to be that with Star Wars stuff, you would get various news cycles, right? You would get... It almost followed a linear pattern. They would have a project coming up, and then you would get some news about it or, whatever, right? But I don't know. It just seems like every once in a while, as you and I tend to do, we'll go through various sites and everything, and stuff that might pop up in a news feed somewhere or whatever that we have, and send it to each other and go, hey, what do you guys think of this? I mean, because a lot of times when we send the stuff to each other, we're just sending it, but then there's some stuff naturally that just jumps out, like, all right, yeah, this is what we're talking about on Friday or Monday or whatever the case may be. And this is definitely one of those things. So let's go ahead and get to that. So basically, Favreau said, we established in the Book of Boba Fett that there was an opportunity for the Mandalorian to be redeemed because he had transgressed against the creed by removing his helmet. So everybody probably remembers that during Season 2 of the book... No, I'm sorry, not Season 2. Season 1 of the Book of Boba Fett... Well, let me backtrack.
Mandalorian.
Yeah, Season 2 of The Mandalorian, he had removed his helmet a couple of times, actually. And then, of course, in Season 1 of the Book of Boba Fett, which we have to start calling it that now because there is going to be a Season 2, you saw him getting basically thrown out of the Mandalorian order that he was in. Okay, so basically, among his group of Mandalorians, getting back to this thing that Favreau was saying, that is something that is not permitted. Now we know that there are other groups of Mandalorians that have different sets of rules, which, again, was established with Bo-Katan and all that in The Mandalorian Season 2. In the Clone Wars, we saw with Dave, and also with the character that I voiced, that Mandalorians are very different there. So these different groups are coming together, and we're going to figure out how they all... the nexus point for all those communities, of course, is their homeworld from which they are exiled, which is Mandalore. So, given that, it really sounds like for this next season, we're going to get a lot of Mandalore. Is that what you're basically taking away from this whole thing?
Yeah, I mean, it almost kind of has to, because at some point you kind of have to address, Mandalore, and especially with the, arrival of Boba Fett, Bo-Katan, her, basically entourage that she kind of has with her. You kind of have to eventually deal with it. And of course, the armorer, we kind of knew it was coming too, because you have these different factions of Mandalorians, and it's like, okay, somehow you have to explain, like, okay, well, why can Bo-Katan and all them take their helmets off and it's fine, versus if Din does it, it's kind of like a curse or something like that. So I
Well, I
think we're
think
gonna
that they
eventually have to deal with. They're gonna. I mean, they've dealt with it, but I think they have to go through with it further, because um, that was that little bar situation they had in Mandalorian season 2 with Boba Fett. When he's just like, and there was this whole thing like, well, you can take your helmet off. Are you really from Mandalore, or are you really a Mandalorian? And it's like, well, yeah, I just don't follow this whole little creed or this whole subsection of that you follow. And it's a whole thing. But
Well, I mean, what I thought was really interesting about that was the fact that first you had Bo-Katan and her little group almost making fun of Din because he thought that all Mandalorians didn't take off their helmets. And then that scene that you refer to where Boba Fett walks in, it's like, oh, well, you're a clone. You're not even really a Mandalorian. Then, of course, he goes through and shows, no, actually, I really am, which was one of the reversals of canon that they did, which I thought was really interesting because up until that point, that really was the case. It was a whole thing to where, well, I mean, there was a backstory before with, oh man, I keep wanting to say it's like Jaster Reel, but it's something like that. But it's a different.
Yeah, that's what it was.
Well, it was a different variation. That's what I would always call it. But I looked it up at some point a few years ago, and it's actually a different type of name. But it's similar to that, though. So that was the first thing, right? That Boba Fett basically donned this Mandalorian armor because it would strike fear in people. And then when Lucas came up with Episode 2, Attack of the Clones, and he wrote Jango Fett in there, well, then it became this whole other thing, right? I mean, it was kind of like, okay, the clones were taken from Jango Fett, and then Boba Fett was an unaltered clone, and then it was implied that it was the same kind of backstory that basically these two guys just pretty much appropriated the whole Mandalorian thing and took the armor and just used it that way. Now, of course, canon has changed again, and it has become, no, surprise, they really are Mandalorians. So what it looks like to me is that you have pretty much these three factions. You have, I think they were going to be like the Disciples of the Watch, or it was something like that, that actually popped up in Clone Wars, but that they were going to try to say that Din was a part of. That was what that little cult was, where they didn't remove their helmets, and they had this whole like weird code and stuff. Then you had Bo-Katan and her group, which is more or less just kind of like your regular Mandalorians, and then you have the Boba Fett, Jango Fett thing. So you're right. It's going to be interesting to see how they're going to have all these different clans or whatever start to fight for Mandalore. And the thing that really makes me wonder here is that Ahsoka, I think, is going to come out after Season 3 of The Mandalorian, if I'm not mistaken. So Mandalorian's coming out in February.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, because I don't think Ahsoka's coming out this year.
No, she's after. Or
right.
She's kind of... yeah, she's definitely after Mandalorian, but I think Mandalorian it's either January or February. I can't remember which one.
It's definitely February. I looked that up earlier.
Okay.
But the thing that I find interesting is you would think that with this kind of a storyline, they would want to bring Sabine. She's a pretty key figure in this whole thing.
Yeah. I mean, especially, because she's actually had the Darksaber, at one point, and she was like the leader of Mandalore. So, we still kind of have to figure out, how did Gideon get the Darksaber? And, so there's and you, like I said, you have all these different clans, you have these different factions of Mandalorians that exist. So it's really going to be interesting. Like I said, I think we're going to get a very big historical account of Mandalore. I think they're going to talk about the Great War Was it the Great Fall? One of the two. Forgot. I think it's the Great
Well,
War.
there is the big war, yeah.
The big war that they had. So there's a lot of things to Mandalorian history that we have yet to really truly delve into. We got a lot of that in Rebels, though.
Well, and that's the thing. We even got a lot in Clone Wars too, where they depicted some of that. And
Yeah,
this is going to be obviously taking place afterward, so it's going to be really interesting to see because, of course, Boba Fett's comments in season 2. Yeah, it was season 2. It's like now I have to think about this, right? Because there's so much Mandalorian in the book of Boba Fett. It's like, okay,
yeah,
where does one
exactly.
show begin and one end? And that's not necessarily a criticism, by the way, because in some ways I think that's kind of cool that these shows are basically sections of one big story. That it's like they blend. They're not so compartmentalized.
Yeah, it makes sense too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and they take place at the same time, so roughly anyway. So when you factor all that stuff in, it definitely makes sense. But I'm just thinking that given the time period here, this is around the time I remember in season 2 of The Mandalorian, Boba Fett in that same bar scene was talking about, well, what do you want with that, slime ball or desolate or whatever he said planet.
Oh, yeah.
He was kind of implying that Mandalore was kind of the garbage pit of the galaxy at this point, and you're basically fighting over trash.
Yeah, it's like a wasteland, basically.
Yeah, it's like a wasteland. So, again, factoring all this stuff in, it just makes me wonder where they're going to go with all this stuff because, again, we got to tease a little bit of what this season is going to be about. And we have a little bit of direction, and this is a big thing because this is something that we did not have previously. We had that leaked trailer, which we featured, and, some of it got cut out, but you could still, if you go and you watch our channel, I'm not even really sure what they cut out, to be honest. But it's up there. We actually did a reaction to it, and we discussed it and everything else. But one of the big things is that we figured that Mandalore would have to come into it a little bit, but we're like, well, where though? And how much? And even though that still is pretty much the question, I think another thing that you have to look at is if this whole thing is going to be centered around him being kicked out of that particular order of the Mandalorians, basically referred to as a cult almost by other ones, right?
Right.
And they took the time, an entire episode, in fact, to set all that stuff up in the Book of Boba Fett, which, of course, will now tee off Season 3 of The Mandalorian. You have to think that a lot of this is going to be about Din trying to figure out where he fits into the whole Mandalorian culture. Does he actually get some redemption? Does he get back into this group that he's a part of? And then where does Grogu fit into all this? Because Grogu essentially had the choice of being a Jedi or being a Mandalorian, in essence. And he chose to go the Mando. So,
well, here's the thing. I think they've always been kind of setting this up, though. Simply because if you look at season 1, even season 1 of The Mandalorian, he took his helmet off.
Yeah.
The only thing that kind of saved him was the fact that no living being saw his face.
Well, that was a rule, though, right? I mean, he could take it off, but just no living being could see your face, right?
Right. Considering that it was a droid that saw his face.
Yeah, it was a little bit of a... yeah, right. It's kind of a little bit of a technicality,
Yep, exactly. So he kind of got away with that one. Then season 2 happens. Okay, then he takes off his helmet to once again be able to have access to find Grogu. So he sacrificed that in order to find, which kind of really was like a touching moment because it's really one of those things that showed you like how deeply he kind of cares for Grogu, that he's willing to lay down the very thing that he so vehemently treasures, which is being a Mandalorian. He was willing to put that aside to find Grogu.
Yes, let's not
Okay.
forget. He had that completely beautiful woman that he could have just spent the rest of his life with in peace and harmony or whatever. He didn't take the helmet off for her.
Nope.
So,
That's
Grogu
right.
had to mean a lot, man, because, she was...
Exactly.
I would have taken the helmet off.
I'm not even going to make that joke.
I
But
know. I
anyway.
was going to... I know. Look, we're all thinking it just insert your own...
Yep.
your own joke here. It's okay. We understand.
Please don't say insert. Anyway, moving forward. So here we go. So now after all that though, you have this moment in season 2 where Din is going up against Moff Gideon. He's got this whole Beskar steel staff and he's battling Gideon. Gideon loses the battle. Now Mando takes the Darksaber. Now technically, he's the ruler of Mandalore.
Yeah.
It's the same Darksaber that, Bo-Katan was coming after. All right. So then now, and of course, unbeknownst to, Din, he had no idea even the story that went along with the Darksaber.
Mm-hmm.
So that was kind of revealed unto him at the end of season 2.
Right.
So what's the conundrum is that now you have this guy who is not really a part of the official Mandalorian, I guess, culture, yet he wields the very weapon that allows him to rule Mandalore. And he's in this space where now he's got Bo-Katan, he's got Moff Gideon, and he's got even Boba Fett, who all kind of like put things into his head as far as who he is.
Mm-hmm.
So this is an identity crisis type thing. No different than the identity crisis that Grogu was kind of facing, because he comes from the Jedi Order. He comes from the Jedi Temple. But yet he kind of had to make a choice between, like you said, do I become a Jedi or do I become a Mandalorian? And now they're on this kind of journey to get together of discovery, that's what it seems. Because now Grogu has the ability of a Jedi. He has the Force. He's used the Force on numerous occasions. And now he's actually had even more training in that, right? So then now it's like, all right, well, where does that factor in? Because let's not forget, the whole reason the Darksaber exists is because a Mandalorian was a Jedi.
Yeah.
So this whole thing is really centered around identity and like, who are you and what do you choose to become? That's what I'm getting in. But you have to kind of look at the home world or the root of it, and that's Mandalore. Because now that's really going to change. And since Mandalore has kind of become a wasteland, for all intents and purposes, could you build Mandalore in a new way? Because it's like, most people are already gone. Can you now decide to change history? Does the Darksaber even matter anymore? Because who are you ruling? No one. Mandalore, the Mandalorians have pretty much been wiped out except for these little pockets that you find here and there. So what does this all even mean as of today? So that's what I think we're going to get in season 3.
And you're probably right. One of the things that I hope that they answer, I'm not 100% convinced that they will, just because of, all the other cans of worms that they've opened up in this thing. But to me, anyway, I think one of the most important things that they need to address is how long has Gideon had that thing? You already brought up the big bantha in the room, which is...
Nice.
I had to. Which is basically, how did he even get it in the first place?
Right.
Because here's a guy who he has zero to do with Mandalorian culture, right? This is not like he captured this thing, put it in a mantle somewhere, some case or whatever, and it's kind of like a trophy or anything. No, he basically well, guess what? This is my personal weapon now. And he's out there just wielding it, no problem.
Mm-hmm.
And we've even seen since the beginning, the first episode, there's been a bunch of Mandalorians around everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
So it's almost like, well, have you all did like Gideon get it maybe within the past year? So like say season 1 takes place at a certain point, right? Within the previous year, did he somehow obtain it, conquer somebody for it, and now it's just taking people a little while to figure out who has it and what they're going to do? Did they not know? I mean, I think you have to not only establish how did Gideon get this thing, I think you have to establish how long has he even had it? Has he had it for 10 years?
Yeah, I mean, that's a valid question. I think there's also kind of going with that. It's like, well, who did he take it from?
Right.
You know,
It's a
because
biggie.
it seems to me that he and Bo-Katan have somewhat of a past relationship, like they've dealt with each other before. And so I'm wondering if, like, okay, because if I recall correctly, Sabine had the Darksaber and she left it to Bo-Katan.
Right.
So when we finally see Bo-Katan, her whole thing is she's trying to find Gideon. She's like, yeah, we'll help you, rescue Grogu, but I want Gideon. I want him. And he's like, whatever, I don't care. I just want the little kid. So they kind of have this mutual understanding. So yeah, it seems to me is that, like, he might have taken it from Bo-Katan, and then now, of course, at the end of season 2, she told him, like, look, Gideon's mine. And he's like, yeah, fine, whatever. And so he's trying to he defeats Gideon, takes the Darksaber. Now he has it, and now she's like, well, she's horrified because, like, great, now he's in possession of it, and he's just trying to hand it off. Like, well, you said you wanted it, here, it's yours. I don't want it. I don't care. And Gideon's like, that's not how it goes.
Yeah, that's not how this whole thing works. Oh man,
Yeah,
he
it's not
must
that
have.
simple.
He was probably just so happy. It's like, okay, listen, I'm captured, scared to death of Luke over here. But I gotta admit, this is incredible.
Yep.
He couldn't have
Exactly.
asked for something better than that,
Yeah, it's like, well, yeah, you can't just give it to her. She has to win it. And so he's like, oh, well, I yield. And he's like, all right, basically I submit to you. Here, it's yours, which is clever. Got to give it to Den on that one. But then there's no honor in that. So, like I said, it's the cultural part of it all. It's the history that goes along with this particular weapon. And that's where the focus, I think, is going to be in season 3 is it's an identity thing. Like, okay, do we still believe in the original Mandalorian culture? Do we change it for what it is now, since Mandalore is pretty much no more? Do we rebuild it in how we want to? It's almost kind of like, for those Bible scholars out there, it's almost kind of like when, God flooded the earth, and it's like, okay, he kind of like took 2 of everything and put them on the ark, and it's like, okay, well, now we're going to start all over again. And that's kind of what it feels like for Mandalore right now. Like, because you still have some Mandalorians around there, but it's like, all right, we need to restart. If we're going to do this, how are we going to do this?
Well,
And
right,
you
because the
have key
Empire came
players,
in.
right? And you have key players who were a part of that, like I said, Bo-Katan, who was around. You have Tar Vizsla, who was originally the Jedi, who was actually on the council, who actually built the Darksaber. That's where all this whole lore kind of came from. You still have Sabine out here, who's part of House Kreese, or I think that's the house that she's from. So you have all these different houses. You have all these clans. Awood, Eldar, Kreese, Clan Rook, Saxon, Vizsla, and Clan Mudhorn. That's the one that I believe Den is in, or he's kind of from, because of the insignia that's if you can move your arrow, Eric, is right over the right shoulder on his little plate. That's where the armor actually gave him his insignia. So, there's a lot to this. And that's what's really going to be really interesting to see what they're going to do with season 3, because we still got to figure out what, his relationship with Grogu as a foundling. Does he start teaching Grogu stuff? Like, okay, well, this is what I know. Does he get him a little, helmet with the ears sticking out? I don't know.
Well,
he's already got the little
everybody's basically expecting that, which would be awesome. But I mean,
yeah.
Well, I mean, here's the thing, too. He was a foundling himself. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of interesting in the sense that he was a foundling brought into the culture, and now he's got to teach his own foundling-ling. Mm-hmm. So it's basically just so many different things that's wrapped up. And basically, from the sense of starting over, I mean, who knows? Because when the Empire came in and defeated them and decimated them, it is going to be interesting to see how they dealt with what Mandalore's like after the Empire just goes in and really crushes them. Because remember, everything that we've seen has been somewhat prior to that point, particularly in the Clone Wars. All right, so David Sumler Jr., did you say the Mandalorian was a Jedi? Not the Mandalorian, meaning Din.
Not the one from the TV show or the series we're watching, but a Mandalorian was a Jedi. Yes, there was a Mandalorian who actually was on the Jedi Council like years ago. His name was Tar Vizsla, and he's the one who created this weapon called the Darksaber.
Yep. And I'm trying to remember exactly during what era he was on the council. I know they covered it. See, a lot of that was covered in the Clone. And this is why, again, I mean, I say this all the time, but the Clone Wars just contains so much history of the franchise, in the sense of when you're watching the Star Wars saga and you're watching the films and you're starting to watch these Disney Plus shows now, there's so much that happened and is answered. Because again, it's not so much that you really need to watch them in order to understand what's going on. You could basically take the stories and everything that's brought up in all these shows almost at face value. They give you a good enough explanation to go, well, all right, I get it. But the thing is, a lot of the background to some of this stuff really took place during the Clone Wars, and then, of course, Rebels as well. But I would say the Clone Wars is more vital because they cover more of that, particularly Mandalorian stuff. Now, it is true that I would say there's almost an equal amount in Rebels, because when you had Sabine going through and doing her thing, they covered an awful lot. And if I'm not mistaken, how much of the Darksaber did they have in the Clone Wars? Or did they introduce that in Rebels? I'm trying to remember.
I think it may have been introduced in it may have been introduced in the Clone Wars. But
yeah, they may have mentioned it. I don't know if they've ever shown it. I think definitely that Rebels is when we first start paying attention to it. Because I remember we were sitting there going, oh, wow, it's like this lightsaber with a black blade or something weird that looks a little like a katana, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And it just seems to me like we wouldn't have had that reaction if it had been brought up. But then again, we might have been saying that during the Clone Wars. I don't know. It's been a minute, guys.
Yeah. Definitely. But Tar Vizsla is from the Old Republic era.
Ah, that makes sense.
Because after his passing, the Darksaber was kept in the Jedi Temple until it was taken by members of House Vizsla during the fall of the Old Republic. And it was used to unite Mandalore.
Of course, all this could change because a lot of the Old Republic sort of lives outside canon. Mm-hmm. It was based on some of the stuff that we've seen in comics. It was based on, of course, the Knights of the Old Republic game. Some other things that have been written about it, but nobody's decanonized it, but nobody's canonized it either. So it
Right.
sort of lives outside canon. So you just have to take it with a grain of salt for now, because there's a good chance that one of these shows can undo it. You know, all of a sudden, the stuff that we're reading, it's kind of like, oh, look, guess what? Here's the new canonized origin story. So,
Right.
but yeah, that makes sense. Does it actually trace? Like, can you look up the Darksaber and figure out, you know, where it went? And
Well, let's see.
because you probably can just, feed in the HoloNet or whatever, and StarWars.com or something, the data bank or whatever they call it, and look up, the Darksaber. I could do it too, but I mean, I'm just saying, but
Yeah,
that's your
but
thing, man. That's your gig. Your gig is to look
know.
stuff up. Mine's to kind of switch and deal with the show.
Yeah, around let's see, 1050 before the Battle of Yavin, that's when he created the Darksaber.
So it was
During his
actually
time as a
relatively
Jedi.
late then in the Old Republic. This is not early Old Republic, because a lot of the Old Republic takes place like 10,000 years before the Battle of Yavin.
Mm-hmm.
So we're actually, I mean, we're not quite there yet, but we're starting to flirt a little with the High Republic era at this point.
Yeah.
Because the High Republic era, if I remember, is somewhere between like 200 years to 1,000 years before the Battle of Yavin. So,
Yep. So let's see.
yes, we could try and trace the Darksaber for you guys. It's going to be fun. It's kind of like a weird Star Wars scavenger hunt.
Right.
Well, this
So
is
the
something,
Darksaber was,
honestly. Go ahead. Because this has been bothering me.
All right, so the Darksaber was an ancient and unique black-bladed lightsaber created by Tar Vizsla. We've already established that. The first Mandalorian ever inducted into the Jedi Order prior to 1032 before the Battle of Yavin. The weapon was kept in the Jedi Temple after Vizsla's passing, but members of House Vizsla stole the saber in a conflict with the Jedi during the fall of the Old Republic. The Darksaber was passed down generation to generation by the ancestors of pre-Vizsla, who held onto the weapon even after the pacifist ideals of the new Mandalorians replaced the warrior ways of Mandalore. By 21, before the Battle of Yavin, the Darksaber was in possession of pre-Vizsla, the leader of Death Watch, and the House Vizsla during the Clone Wars. He used the blade during his conflicts with the new Mandalorians, including his successful takeover of Mandalore.
That it?
Oh no, I mean that's a whole like. I mean, we'll be here.
Well, you don't have to. I mean, you don't have to like read the thing like word for word, but just kind of like trace through it. Like where did it go? After it went there, where did it go, and so on and so forth.
All right, so then of course
this is great. It's like a 5-hour podcast. Okay, and then 500 years before the yeah, exactly. You're just like reading this whole thing. It's like I'm all like tanked out.
It's like a PBS
you're like
special.
clapping. Trying to. It's like right.
After the coup, renegade Lord, Sith Lord Maul killed Vizsla in a duel and took the Darksaber for his own. And became the leader of Death Watch. However, Maul's old master Sidious soon arrived to Mandalore to confront his apprentice. And he used the lightsaber, but was ultimately bested in combat, taken prisoner and held at the Separatist prison.
Hate when that happens.
So after Maul had it, during the Imperial era, the Mandalore, a Mandalorian weapons expert and rebel Sabine Wren retrieved the Darksaber from Night Sister Ire on Dathomir. That's where she got it from. At the urging of the Mandalorian protector Fenn Rau and her fellow Spectres. So then Kanan, of course, taught her kind of how to use it. She became the rightful wielder of the Darksaber after defeating the Imperial Viceroy Gar Saxton in a duel.
So yeah, this is all stuff that happened in Rebels.
Right, and then they went over to Bo-Katan. And after the Great Purge of Mandalore, the Empire desecrated Mandalore, and Bo-Katan lost possession of the Darksaber. She fled the planet but continued to lead the Night Owls and was intent on reclaiming the Darksaber in Mandalore. By circa 9 years after the Battle of Yavin, the weapon had fallen to the hands of Moff Gideon.
Okay.
So that's where we are at this point.
Well, but see, that answers a very critical question, though. How long had Gideon had it? So he had it starting with 4 years. Was it 9 years after the battle?
Yep.
Hey, look up and see when the Mandalorian takes place. They might have just pulled a fast one on us. I know it's 6 years after Return of the Jedi, but I wonder if it's 9 years after the Battle of Yavin. Like they're trying to be a little sneaky. And while you do that, I can answer this question from David. So he basically says, who wants a saber from Din? Bo-Katan wants a saber from Din. I'm sure Gideon does too. I mean, I'm sure. But, and I mean, again, it's interesting because they really did a brilliant move when they had Din basically beat Gideon in combat, because that was precisely what Bo-Katan was trying to tell him not to do. It's like, look, I get Gideon, you get to get your little Grogu back. and the thing that's funny about that is the fact that it wasn't like, Din was all right, screw it, I'm going to go ahead and take him on. I mean, basically had no choice. Yeah, it just kind of happened that way, and it was kind of like, wait, I can't beat you because, Bo-Katan, I promised, and all that. You can't do that, right? So he ends up beating him. So he gets a Darksaber, which is a completely unintended consequence. The furthest thing, he didn't even really want to be involved in any of this stuff. He just wanted Grogu back. And then all of a sudden, this happens to him. Do you have the answer, by the way, to how many years after the Battle of Yavin does the Mandalorian take place? Sounds like a Jeopardy question. I'll take Star Wars for $300. I was going to say Alex, but he's dead.
I know.
I mean, you could tell that Bo-Katan really was after Gideon, though. Maybe she was his account manager. But anyway, little inside humor there for us to keep us entertained. So did you actually type it in the way that I said? How many years after the Battle of Yavin?
9 years.
See, I knew it. I knew they would pull some sort of a... See, I was kind of hoping that maybe through the whole backstory type channels, the data bank, the Holonet, like all these other different things, that maybe they would try to sneak in a little bit of a backstory there, but nope. So the question becomes, when Gideon basically first, or I should say it like this, the first appearance of the Darksaber that we see as the audience happens when the end of season 1, when he crashes his TIE fighter and he, cuts through the top and he's wielding the Darksaber. Now, I mean, did he just get it? And it's just kind of like, okay, on the way back.
He could have had like a couple of days ago. I mean, we don't know.
Yeah, I mean, did he just get it like a few days ago going, hey, I think I'll try this thing, right? Or...
ordered off of Amazon, I don't know, eBay.
Yeah, right. Exactly. That's it. It's kind of like, he got it, maybe, who knows, maybe Maz Kanata gave it to him. But, yeah, you just see things like that and you wonder, because again, I can't stress this enough. This probably doesn't seem like that big of a deal to anybody, but how long he was in possession of it is actually, I mean, I won't say that it's like a super vital point, because some of the other points that you brought up, I think are probably more important. However, that said, I think the duration of his possession of this thing can tell us some things, and I think could provide some key plot points. Because obviously, you know, how did he win, and who did he get it from, and all that stuff. Yes, that's a really vital thing. But how
But
long he's had it?
But the biggest question, honestly, out of all of it, is what was his intent?
Yeah. Right,
Because
like,
you
was
have
he
to look at
trying to
from
get
this.
it, or was it one of those things that he beat somebody in battle? It's just like, hey, by the way, since you beat me, you get this little saber now. It's not my rule.
Well, no, because the fact that he knows so much history behind it. I mean, and him being an IFB agent, like, I mean,
Yeah.
of course, like, he's paid to know, you know, stuff like that. But the bigger thing is, though, it's like, see, I wonder, and this is what I was like, you know, I was wondering if he was trying to make himself a Jedi himself, and then, of course, rule Mandalore. Because here's the thing: if we're speculating that Gideon's part of the reason why they wanted Grogu's blood, which we've already established, that's what they wanted. Part of it may have been used to maybe revive Palpatine. Maybe that was part of the reason. But I also feel like Gideon might have wanted some of that for himself, because it would give him possibly those abilities. And with him having his own lightsaber now, essentially, now it makes him a full-blown, you know, Jedi, Sith Lord, whatever you want to call him. But see, the fact that he now has the dark saber, it also affords him the right to Mandalore. So any other Mandalorians that he has or he runs across, he now can say, like, hey, you belong to me now. You work for me because I have the dark saber. So it seems like he's kind of building his own thing off to the side while still trying to possibly do his imperial duties, shall we say, and revive Palpatine.
Well, and
That's
speaking of
just, you know, my
Palpatine,
thoughts.
David basically says, Palpatine, let's go. Put him in the show. Yeah, you know, see, the problem is they almost could now, because we have episode 9, thank you.
Mhm.
But one of the things, and of course he actually continues, let me get this second part in here. Give Palpatine the Darksaber, LOL.
He doesn't need it. Trust me.
He's the Darksaber's like the last thing. If he wants to rule Mandalore, he'll just go take it. With his immense powers that
Yeah.
he barely even needs his own lightsaber. The Darksaber's going to do nothing for him.
Yes. Besides, he has his own lightsaber anyway.
Right. Which is really good too. And then he's got all kinds of stuff. But, you know, addressing Palpatine too, it's kind of like I've already, I think, had my fill of enough Force users and stuff in The Mandalorian. I mean, it's one of those things that, one of the things that I thought The Mandalorian was really
Good at.
Yeah, I guess good at, or at least
Or made unique.
Yes, unique. That's better. The unique thing about it, the thing that was part of the whole setup of it, is look, let's just not deal with Jedi and Sith and the Force. Let's just have this good old-fashioned Western style, or maybe like the old series Kung Fu or whatever. You know, you got this lone gunman, warrior, whatever, going around and getting into these various adventures or whatever. And maybe they tie into stuff. Now, of course, if they were trying to bring in Thrawn, I don't necessarily mind the fact that Ahsoka popped up. And in fact, I'm kind of glad she did. Because she was one of those ones where you're like, okay, she is this big deal, this huge character. They brought her into Rebels, which happens not too long before episode 4. And then all of a sudden she's gone, right? She just disappears. So I like the fact that they found a way to bring Ahsoka in. Because really all Ahsoka was doing was just okay, she's looking for Thrawn, which opens that whole thing up, which is fine. And plus, she's not, I mean, if you really want to be hyper technical, she's not a Jedi anymore. But, you know, and I know you were feeling the same way, where it was kind of like, look, we just wanted a Star Wars story that didn't deal with all that. Now, don't get me wrong, I, like everybody else, jumped up and down, cheered, did cartwheels, whatever, when Luke Skywalker popped up at the end. But, again, I mean, if you're bringing Grogu in, a lot of that stuff makes sense. I mean, they haven't really overdone it yet, but I hope that they don't.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Is like once you introduce Grogu into it, you completely change the dynamic. And he was brought in so early.
Yeah, like second episode or something?
Yeah, it's like, how could you, you know what I'm saying? Like, how could you not at this point?
That's
because
true.
now, and it's not like you just found some force sensitive, you know, child or something like that. I mean, the thing looks like, I mean, why everybody kept calling him Baby Yoda. I mean, like,
Baby Yoda.
That's you just can't ignore that, you know. And it's like, all right, well, now what do you do? And then of course when baby, you know, not baby, no, but when Grogu starts using the Force, now it's like, okay, well, now you've opened the door now for other Force users to pop in, and it makes sense for, okay, Ahsoka to show up. It makes sense for Luke to show up in relation to him, because now you have this super powerful Force being that looks like both of their masters. You know what I mean? Like Ahsoka and Luke was trained by Yoda. You know what I mean? So
I mean, you're not wrong, right? I mean, that's a good point.
So it's like you kind of have to.
Well, here's the thing that I think will strike a good balance, because on one hand, yes, you bring in Grogu, it's necessary to do that, and on top of that, it was kind of a neat way to give us a glimpse at what Luke is doing during this time period without necessarily focusing on that and making it its own show.
Right.
So I think that actually is a stroke of genius, that they're using the Mandalorian story, because remember, a long time ago when the thing first started, we said, look, this is a flagship show. The Mandalorian is going to be the mothership that spawns all these other shows, and things are going to reference back to The Mandalorian. And one of the things that it's doing, and I think it's doing it successfully, is you're seeing a situation where it's answering the questions, I guess, for lack of a better term, that we've all had, because right after Return of the Jedi, it's like, well, what's Luke doing? Now, if you just had a thing that focused on the Mandalorians taking, you know, this whole bounty hunter thing, smugglers, pirates, you could actually have the show and have it not involve any Force user whatsoever. However, like you said, you start bringing in any Force user, well, now it turns into, well, what's Luke doing now? And what's this person doing now? And, you know, so I think that it's going to be important to establish some of this stuff, so that way if you do want to bring it up in another show, you can, right? You can maybe do a spin-off show and here's Luke's Jedi Academy. I don't know, whatever you want to do. But the point is, you use The Mandalorian, your mothership show, to introduce the concept, and then you can seed out another show to that. And I think that those are the kinds of things that they're doing successfully. But what I hope that they don't do, and again, I don't really have any reason to think that they're going to, but that temptation could be there, you know? Ratings, popularity, that kind of thing. Hey, let's shoehorn Darth Vader into this thing, like they've done sometimes. So you do have to be careful that you don't overuse certain characters, or you don't abuse the popularity of some of these characters. And I think that so far, I think they've done a really good job in the balance of that. I just hope they don't. And it sounds like, just from what Favreau said and where the storyline's going to go, we're probably going to see less of that, actually. Because like you said, it's going to focus a little bit more on identities and, you know, where people are going and the whole Mandalore aspect. And it's going to really be dealing with just the choices that people are making and what are the consequences of those choices. So that's what I'm hoping anyway.
Yeah, I mean, it should be a fun ride as always. I think we're going to get a lot from it. I think we're going to have, of course, the fun, the comedy that's going to be there.
Yeah.
Even from the trailer, seeing Grogu like in a little starfighter, a little Naboo starfighter. I mean, that's just
See, I'm
funny and
laughing
cute.
already, right?
Yeah, you know what I'm saying? So, yeah, I think it's going to be really cool. And like I said, there's a lot of questions that need to be answered, and we won't get those until February 2023.
Yeah. Well, before we wrap up, David has a comment, but I have to say, you said the comedy, and nothing to me. I don't know why, but I honestly think as many hilarious moments as there's been in that show, and there have been some just really, really funny moments. The one that just gets me, that just like reaches down my little humor, soul or whatever, and just like pulls it right out, was the whole when they had Grief Karga going, use the magic hands.
Magic, yeah.
Yeah, because that's exactly.
Yeah, that's priceless.
I mean, that is just the way that he delivered that line. He's shaking his hands like, use the magic. I mean, because that's what she would think. I mean, if you saw that,
Well, especially because like the Force at that point, and that's the time period in which it was, the Force was like people didn't see it. There weren't Jedi running around, and Vader and the Sith were kind of. I mean, and Vader and Palpatine were kind of ruling and doing their thing. I mean, they didn't even need to see them anymore because you have stormtroopers pretty much on patrols and garrisons and all that stuff. So, they really didn't see the Force. So to see some little kid lifting stuff and doing things is kind of like, what the heck is this? And so, and not to mention, it's Apollo Creed, man. I mean,
I know,
it's Apollo
man.
Creed.
I mean, it just,
that just makes it even more funny. But
it does.
To add with that, though, the one of the funnier moments for me is when Grogu started choking Gina Carano.
Oh yeah, that was
because he thought she was trying to attack Mando, and he was not playing. Like,
nope. Well, and of course, when he started eating all the eggs, the children, like you're supposed to like protect them, and he's just snacking on them.
I mean, he is sucking those things down like no
tomorrow. Granted, that was a little darker, but it was still just as funny. But I don't know, for some reason, I had all these like visions of like Palpatine like looking at Vader, going, "Use your magic hands," or something. I mean, it just it's just funny. All right, so David's comment. He says, who would you all love to see write or direct in season 3? Well, I think pretty much I could give you...
Yeah, Favreau and Filoni.
Yeah, Favreau, Filoni, and Bryce Dallas Howard.
Yeah.
Because to me, she is the future director of Star Wars. Like, if I could only choose one director to direct future Star Wars films, it would be her. Because when you look at all the things that she's directed... She understands the Star Wars humor. She understands pacing and how to craft a good story. How to fit the humor in without it being forced. I mean, I can't say enough about it. And if you go back and actually look at all the episodes that she directed like, I think 1 or 2 in the first season. I think she directed like 1 or something in the second season. And then she directed that Mandalorian-centric episode in the Book of Boba Fett. And she just, every time, you could just tell that...
Didn't miss.
It just, she's just really, like really good. Pretty much. I mean, she's just probably the best. I mean, I think that she's even better than Filoni as far as that goes. I would actually say if you really, really wanted to knock it out of the park, you get Filoni to write it, you get Bryce Dallas Howard to direct it. So, hopefully that answers the question.
That I would take, yeah.
That would probably be good. But of course, the question is always not with us, it lies with you. What do you guys think of this whole Mandalore thing? Do you think that the focus should be on Mandalore, or do you think, is there something else that you would like to see be the focus of Season 3 of The Mandalorian? let us know. We'll leave this poll up. And I've never actually done a poll in the chats before, so I don't know if when we sign out, if it just automatically goes away and ends, or... I mean, right now we got 100% yes, when it's kind of like, do you think... do you think that there's going to be Mandalore is going to play a big part in this thing? I mean, so far there's been an overwhelming yes, so I don't know. I'll leave it up if I can. If it doesn't end, see what happens. In the meantime, there is also the subscribe button, the like button. You guys always know. I got to say it, right? Hit the like button if you haven't done so already. If you like the episode, want to see some more, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of our content. We go live every Monday and Friday at 8 o'clock. If we can't go live on those times because of some sort of a schedule conflict or whatever, then we'll either pre-record an episode or we'll just go live later. Like we did this past Monday. But you guys will always know, because at some point I dream of having enough subscribers and everything that we can actually have a community tab going. And then we can really keep you guys updated. But, just keep your eye out. Like I said, if you hit the notification bell, then you'll be notified as to when we're going live and everything. So you're going to want to do that. And then, as an added bonus, if you guys really like what we're doing and you want to support the show in a monetary way and make any kind of a donation, you could do that. There's a link below. Our buymeacoffee.com account that we do. It's buy us a blue milk. We even got a nice little picture of a blue milk up there. So, and then there's various packages that we offer too. If you guys want to support us and become members on as a monthly basis, that would be cool too. Whatever you guys want to do, we're totally glad to just have you guys around and watching the show and chatting with us. Do we have a top? I always ask this. By the way, just dawned on me. We did not make a single Star Trek reference tonight.
Yeah, there it is.
Well, I mean, other than that, but I mean, I'm just saying, usually we do, but for this,
right.
We actually went the whole show without doing it. I mean, and I don't know how long, but kind of interrupted my whole flow. But do we know what we're actually talking about on Monday? Did we decide that yet? I don't remember if we did or not.
Not yet.
All right. Well, sorry guys, you're just gonna have to tune in on Monday and see what we talk about. Well, we'll get into something, and it'll be Star Wars. So with that, I'm Eric Vansel.
I'm Daryl Sanders.
May the Force be with you.
Always.
Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter @HeadToHeadSW. Submit your questions for our next show. Visit our official website at headtoheadswpodcast.com. Until next time, may the Force be with you, always.